I'm going to do a presentation called Does Christianity Oppress Women? And I'm standing right in front of it. So I'll move over here. All right, can we see it okay? All right, the reason that this presentation came about is Christi contacted Southern Evangelical Seminary, where my husband and I were dean of students for 10 years. And they contacted us in North Carolina and said, would someone from the seminary come and do this debate? The Atheist Club had challenged the Christi to debate with this title, Does Christianity Oppress Women? And so we just talked about it, prayed about it, thought about it, and another woman who works at the seminary, Diana Newman, and I decided that we would be willing to do a panel discussion with them. Now, as you see how it seems to be set up, does Christianity oppress women? We thought, you know what, it would be best to do a panel discussion because we don't want to be focused on winning points, right? We want our full say about these issues. And we felt we were kind of being set up to see if they could refute Christianity, not does Christianity oppress women, really. So what we decided to do was we said, okay, we'll do this panel discussion. Y'all pick 2 people, we'll have 2 people, and we'll just spend all night discussing it. If you want to do that, we'll do it. And they said, okay. So we planned for about 4 months. It was in the fall of 2013, right before we got ready to do the debate in January. After 4 months of planning, they backed out. They said, we don't want to talk to people who know so much about the Bible. So we began to figure out what was going on. It was really about hoping they would pick 1 or 2 new Christi students to debate them. They didn't want seminary students, but what they got was 2 seminary students. And Diana Newman, if she were here, you would really like her a lot. She's we're very different, but very good friends. She is of Jamaican nationality. She is from Canada. She came to Southern Evangelical Seminary. She has a graduate degree in apologetics and with a concentration in philosophy, with a background in sociology and psychology. And my degree is from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and then I got my master's at Southern Evangelical Seminary. So in religion. So what you're going to hear is how we put this discussion together. We said, you know what? We're going to go ahead and prepare this, and we're going to present it. And if she were here, she's not because we just got back from a New Jersey conference, you would hear us discussing this between ourselves, and then we would have that kind of dynamic. But I wanted you to see this is how it was set up for that reason. So we would begin then with an opening statement. Before I get there, wait a minute. I'm going to have to use this, I think. All right. Let me see. Okay. First of all, what we wanted to do, even though this was not going to be a debate, we prepared an opening statement. And the reason we did that was so that we could clear up a few things before the debate began or the discussion began. Because a lot of times when you start talking about things, you realize that people are talking about 2 different things, and we wanted to define this very clearly. So the question is not, do Christians oppress women? It is, does Christianity oppress women? And there's a difference here, because if you were to ask anybody, we would say, have Christians in the past ever oppressed women? Yes. Have men, have all religions oppressed women at some point? Yes. Have non-religious places and people and governments oppressed women? Yes. Have women oppressed women? Yes. Have men oppressed women? Yes. Have women oppressed men? Yes. So what we're saying is that we're going to be talking about Christianity, the ethics of Christianity. Does Christianity teach the oppression of women? Does Christianity allow for the oppression of women? Okay? So we would want to do that, and then we would say, we're not talking about Islam, we're not talking, because a lot of times people will start just talking about religion in general as the oppressive thing. We're not talking about that. And then we would touch mostly on the Christian ethic, because that's mostly the New Testament, right? And then we would say, have to touch a little bit on feminism, because feminism is what drives this question on the campus. you know? And we're talking about, if you were to ask Diana and I, you know, we both have seminary degrees, right? We didn't fall off the turnip truck, right? We've experienced ourselves some behavior that I would say was oppressive, right?
Not for me.
Not for me. But we would say that, yes, you know, we admit, but what drives this question is a little bit different than just, okay, well, of course we agree women are of equal value as men. Of course we're all equally human, and of course, you know, if women do the same work as men and men do the same work as women, we should all be paid equally, right? So this is not really, that would be a basic form of feminism that just says, you know, people should be treating everybody equally for the same work. They should be paid the same and all of those kind of things. But what drives this question is radical feminism. And so we're going to touch a little bit on what radical feminism holds and why this question is rampant on the campus, okay? So I'm going to have to do this really quickly. So y'all put your thinking caps on, because I want to have a little time for y'all to ask questions if you think of something at the end, okay? All right, so what we're going to be going through, this is my outline. We're going to talk about, does oppression happen? We're going to say, what are the possible causes and solutions to oppression? How does natural law play into this? In other words, is Christianity congruent with reality? Okay? And then we're going to talk a little bit about how all these little, you know, you see these little dots, how they play into the answer to this question. We're going to touch on those. We're going to say how the Old and New Testament interact. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about equity feminism versus gender feminism. Okay? So you can kind of see the big picture. Okay? So, first of all, to ask the question, does Christianity oppress women? We have to think about, okay, oppression. Does oppression happen? Well, there are two worldviews. We're going to say two really basic worldviews. And most everybody in here knows this, but I'm going to just say it. Either you're a theist or an atheist, pretty much. Either, we're going to divide into those two groups. A person who believes that the material world is all that exists. That matter and energy, that's it, and it's eternal, and that it's always existed. Okay? So that would be some sort of biological Darwinism, okay, where God is left out completely. Basically, the survival of the fittest, okay? So what works in the survival of the fittest is actually pretty good when the other guy loses, right? When the other guy loses, that means your genes get to go on, right? And so the survival of the fittest in the social Darwinism says that if I climb the ladder and knock the guy off under me, that's a good thing, because I want to survive socially too. So social Darwinism is what we would say would be the materialist view of the world. There is no God, there is no moral lawgiver, right? So then the other side would be theism, where we say, you know what, there's a material world, but there's an immaterial moral lawgiver. In our category, there is such a thing as oppression. In the other category, social Darwinism, if you were consistent, there would be no oppression, because it would just be good if you survived, if you're surviving. So really, for them to even ask us the question is inconsistent with their worldview, if you break it all the way down. But with Christianity, we would say, we have this category, and we call it sin. And sin is detrimentally using another for your own advantage, okay, to their disadvantage. So we would say, okay, we're going to entertain this question, even though you don't really consistently hold this, or explain to us how you consistently hold that position, okay? So we would go on to say, okay, in Christianity, we know oppression happens. We know what we would say sin. We would call it sin. They might call it oppression. We would say, you know, the wisest man who ever lived said, remember good old Solomon? He said, then I looked again at all the acts of oppression which were being done under the sun, and behold, I saw the tears of the oppressed, and that they had no one to comfort them. Okay, that was Solomon. So we're saying, yeah, and all through our scripture, from chapter 3 of Genesis to the end, we see man with a fallen nature, a nature that is going to oppress or sin against his neighbor. Every one of us is going to do it to some degree. And that's what Christianity says. And so we would say, okay, do any of us like that? No, we don't like it when someone steals our lunch, breaks into our home, murders our family, or the whole government murders a whole gender, such as in communist China, where baby girls are killed by abortion. And now they have a huge lack of females in that country, which is going to cause a huge problem for them down the road, and already is. So we would say, you know what? They're governments, godless governments that are oppressive, and there's oppression even in democracies, believe it or not, right? Okay? So we're saying, yeah, and nobody likes it. So it seems to be the case that wherever there's human nature, there's oppression. It's not religion, because, religion or non-religion, wherever people have more power and selfishness, then they're going to oppress the other person, whether it's your little brother or a whole country, okay? All right, so we said, okay, we are saying it is a problem with humanity. That the problem with humanity exists. But with the Atheist Club, we said, okay, tell us how you would solve the problem of oppression without having an immaterial moral lawgiver. What would you do? What would be your human answers to oppression? Well, of course, only in the 21st century would you think of this. But nowadays, bioengineering might be an answer, right? Let's just get rid of all differences. I mean, if we get rid of all differences, there actually won't be a category called male and female. We could actually do that. We could just cut off parts and give people medicine and let them, just all be this. But, we say, okay, is that realistic? Does that really make someone, can we really make people have exactly the same characteristics? Can we really make males and females be exactly the same, or all individuals, right? In this case, we're talking about gender oppression, but we could be talking about racial oppression or economic oppression. But we know in the case of gender right now, big topic, right? People are trying to change their sex, but could we ever really come up with a society where everything was just totally equal? Men having babies, and because that's what feminists point to as a big problem for women. It holds us back, right? We have to have babies. So in this way, we would say, okay, bioengineering really only would apply for the 1% in the United States who can afford to do all those things, and still, is that going to get rid of oppression? Okay? Well, my friend Diana has a twin sister. And when I look at them, they look exactly the same to me. But when one of them opens their mouth and starts talking, I know which one is Diana. And it's not by her accent. It's because I know her. And we, as individuals, act certain ways, right? So that idea of bioengineering is very naive and would only probably be thought of in a first world country. But the most common answer to that would be human government is going to take care of the problem. Because that's what's really over the centuries been the answer, right? Human government, okay? It's sort of the low rung, this is what is expected of you. Drive down this side of the road if you're in the United States, drive down the other side if you're from England, don't break into somebody's house, right? And basically you're expected to follow the bottom rung, okay? But we know that human governments fail miserably. And we've seen that throughout the centuries, whether it is communist China, Russia, socialism, Marxism, democracy even, okay? Fail to bring about a totally complete government that doesn't in some way force somebody to do something they don't want to do, okay? So we're going, okay, if that's the case, let's see if we could come up with an idea of a type of government that, you know, sort of would symbolize John Lennon's song, Imagine. You know, imagine no country, no religion too, right? You know that song? Okay. Well, just to kind of back this up, there is a anthropological, sociological study that would really, I'm sorry, I went backwards, didn't I? Let's see. Here we go. There's a anthropological study done, and it was probably the best. We looked at a lot of different governments, types of government. Probably Norway had the most, where they had been pushing equality between the sexes, where they wanted 50% of their women in business and 50% of their women in government. And they were finding that they were having to do what? Force to do these things. In fact, they even had to ask women to go home and pay them to keep their own children. Okay? So even in that situation where there's forcing people to do something that they don't naturally choose to do, that is moral, okay? But there was one example that seemed to be the best example for an anthropologist and a sociologist point of view, and that was the Israeli kibbutz. Has anybody heard of an Israeli kibbutz? Because y'all are so young. But we, who were raised in the 60s and 70s, the kibbutz was the hippie commune, okay? You know what I'm talking about? Do y'all know what I'm talking about? Okay, in Europe, in Eastern Europe, Jews and Russian Jews wanted to come back because they were nationally Israelis, and they wanted to come back to Israel. So they established these kibbutzes, okay? Kibbutzes, I'm not sure that's the plural, but that's how I'm going to say it, okay? And the kibbutz, the one I'm going to talk to you about is called the Artezi kibbutz. And the reason we're going to use that one is because in that one, the men and women, as most of the communes said, okay, men and women are going to be exactly the same. Now, I agree, men and women are equal, but we're not exactly the same, okay? But what they were saying is we're going to treat you as if you're exactly the same. And so these people voluntarily did this. So picture about 200 women, okay? I mean, let's say 200 total people, men and women, moving on to a farm, okay? And they're going to take care of it together. The men and women are all going to do the chores. They're going to plow fields. They're going to dig ditches. They're going to nurture the children. They're going to cook meals. They're going to hold all their possessions in common. And they're all going to hold hands and sing Kumbaya. They're all going to be happy, and nobody's going to be dissatisfied because everybody's going to be 100% treated the same. Okay? So this book, interesting, Women in the Kibbutz, a study of women over 3 generations, 34,000 women, okay? This tells the story. This is one of many, but this is not, this was written, I think, by a Jew. But nevertheless, what's interesting about it is, okay, so the only thing that they couldn't really eradicate was the fact that women have babies, right? We haven't figured out how to do that for you boys yet, but that was the problem. So the men and women who were married slept in the same quarters, but they did not have living quarters, okay? So when a baby was born, they would take the baby at 2 weeks and put that baby in the communal nursery. So who do you think was the first gender that was dissatisfied? Women. Because women do not like you to take away their 2-week-old baby. There's something about that in terms of their oxytocin and estrogen that says, don't you dare take my baby, right? And so those women did not like that, okay? And down the road, they wanted family celebrations. And they did not want everybody in the commune to be a part of that. And so this book tells that story. But then, as the communes developed and the world got more industrial, Okay, the communes got more industrial and they became more capitalistic in nature. Okay, and they were making some good money. Before, you know, the guys were happy for the women to help plow the fields and dig the ditches. You know, they were okay with that. But they were not happy when the capitalist system made a lot of money and they wanted to be rewarded for their particular expertise. Okay? So then the men were dissatisfied with that arrangement. Now, y'all may look at me and say, well, that's very stereotypical. Guess what? There's a reason it's stereotypical. Okay? We're going to look at a quote from Margaret Mead. Everybody who's taken first semester sociology or anthropology knows who Margaret Mead is. Okay? I would not say Margaret Mead had any agenda in terms of Christianity to say the things she said. Okay? This is what she said, and you'll find it, I think, interesting. And guys, I'm not going to be hard on you. I'm going to tell the story on both sides, but you get it up first, okay? So this is what Margaret Mead said. She said, in every known human society, the male need for achievement can be recognized. The recurrent problem of civilization is to define the male role satisfactorily enough so that the male may, in the course of his life, reach a solid sense of irreversible achievement. Now we're going to find out why that's the case, okay? All right, I agree that that's true, but Margaret Mead, more importantly than me, has studied a whole lot of civilizations. And we're going to see if what she says matches reality, okay? All right, this is the next thing she says in her book, Male and Female. She says, men have to learn to want to beget children and to cherish children and to maintain a society in which children are provided for as well as simply protected against enemies. Interesting that men have to learn this, okay? All right, do you see anything in our culture that might say what happens when men don't learn that skill? We have a big, huge problem, okay? All right, so let's talk a little bit about natural law. We're going to mention this because natural law, does anybody kind of know what natural law is? Well, it's basically the regular common man's common sense, okay? All right, so if the group that we're talking to, the atheist club, okay, doesn't agree with our view, if their solution is human government, and we've just talked about the kibbutz, okay, then we would say, okay, that didn't work. Tell us what any other solutions might be that would totally eradicate the differences between the sexes, okay? We would come back and say, since you really shouldn't be asking this question based on your worldview, we're going to tell you what our answer would be. And it would be the change of the human heart, right? And we know that that is through the gospel, okay? But this is one thing we would expect. They live in the real world, and they see the real world, and they have to recognize certain things about humanity, okay? They understand that humanity, just like you and I, lives in community. And for us to do that, there has to be something special about humans that make us able to live in community. Something immaterial about us, okay? So really, whether you're religious or not, you know certain things. You look at the species, the higher animals, male, female, right? Fruitful, fill the earth, multiply. We see that, right? We know, and if any of y'all are married, which I don't know if any of y'all are, but if you live with a man or work with a man, you know he's different than you are. Not just in his outer appearance, but the way he does things. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But I guess my best example of natural law is, okay, here's a great example of natural law, all right? If my dog Butch goes down the street because he smells steaks on the grill and moves in with the neighbors, we don't think he's immoral, right? But if my husband Duke goes down the street because he smells steaks on the grill and moves in with the Johnsons, we know he's immoral, right? Okay, so all humanity knows certain things about humans. We don't expect beavers to rule the planet, correct? We expect humans to steward it, Christian and non-Christian, right? We expect people to take care of their things, right? Okay, so what is it about humanity that is so different? We are different than the rest of creation. We have a soul-body unity, okay? We have an immaterial, material oneness. When those things are separate, you're dead, okay? You're dead. So you have the sensory body that is, you can't separate from the immaterial, rational soul that has an intention or a will to use it. We have this will to survive, this will to make it. Okay, those things we cannot separate. If we separate it, we're dead, okay? So this soul-body unity is the human essence. It's what it means to be human. For us as Christians, we would say God is immaterial, right? Okay? He doesn't have a sensory body. He doesn't have to learn things, right? We have sensory bodies. We pick up on things, we're using it with our rational mind, we're making a decision on how we're going to do this, okay? So that is how we are made in God's image, and we would say that is what makes humans different than the rest of creation. So, this is the one I like the most, and we'll see what y'all think about this. This particular slide is going to show you what happens when the Y chromosome takes over, okay? Let's talk a little bit about this, okay? So, there is increasing evidence to show that the brain is a sexual organ, okay? Dr. Gaia Aronoff and Dr. Jennifer Bell, two pediatric endocrinologists, and I'm going to go back to that last slide because I know y'all want to see it up close. I want you to see it. Okay, but anyway, so these two pediatric endocrinologists made this statement. What caused them to make this statement? Well, there are numerous studies that show the difference between the male and female brain, the part where we do the processing, okay? All right, this is one study that took place. These 14 neurologists from the University of California, Stanford, and Michigan took the brain tissue of 30 stroke victims, okay? These people are dead, okay? They've got their brain tissue, and they're looking at them. 100% of the time, they can tell whether it is a male brain or a female brain by looking at this structure. Why? Because the male brain is richly coated in proteins directed by the Y chromosome, and the female brain is richly coated in proteins directed by the X chromosome. Okay? And as this doctor, this is a study, you'll see it's the one neuropsychopharmacology. That's the study right there. But that's one of many studies, okay? What happens is, as Dr. Leonard Sachs, the bottom line is that the brain is just organized differently in males and females. Neither is more intelligent. It's like arguing over which utensil is better, a knife or a spoon. Better for what should be asked. All right, we're going to go back to that last one because I want y'all to see it. Okay, so at 6 to 8 weeks of gestation, the Y chromosome directs the testosterone to rush through the male brain. Okay, it separates the left and right side. It also floods every bone, muscle, tissue. Okay, and even if, can you see that? Even if there is some sort of birth defect, you know, with a chromosomal, if there is a Y chromosome, that person is male. According to Dr. Leonard Sachs, that's how they determine it because that's what releases the testosterone. Okay, so that Y chromosome then causes certain things to happen. Males have a smaller corpus callosum. Your brain is more asymmetrical, okay? So, being more asymmetrical means you have a differentiated personality structure. And that differentiated personality structure makes you be more compartmental, okay? So if you're more compartmental in your thinking, you're able to focus on one thing and one thing alone, and you're optimized for solve the problem. Solve the problem. Okay? That is the goal, and very goal-oriented towards that. And what you've seen over history, over many, many centuries, decades, centuries, is that men have been successful in exploration and defense because they are more aggressive because of testosterone. They're peer-oriented, so they're looking out at their world and saying, hey guys, let's conquer that, right? Okay, now there's nothing wrong with that. I celebrate that as a female. I think that is an awesome way to be, but I'm not that. And I celebrate the female, what the female brings to the table, okay? But the male tends to hold things out from himself and push it out into the world to take care of the problem, okay? This problem. The female is structured in such a way, she has 2 X chromosomes. She has a little, this is called fallback X chromosome, which means women are actually more different than each other than was ever known. They're different than males, but they're also more different than each other, okay? Women have what's known as an integrated personality, and that's because we have a more asymmetrical brain. Now, I'm not talking about body parts, I'm talking about just the brain, okay? Our brains are highly connected, and we have a very large corpus callosum. So we're always doing subconscious processing.
Size doesn't matter, though.
No, it doesn't matter. In this case, we're talking about thinking about everything at once, girls. Not being able to drop what goes over there, because that over there has something to do with this. And don't ask us to separate it, okay? Because that's who we are, right? And it is valuable, okay? But we also appreciate in the workforce, in the family, in the church, you guys who can be compartmental. Yeah, you do your compartmental thing, that's fine. But guess what? We temper it with our bringing in the empathy, okay? Bringing in the concern, bringing in the nurture that comes from oxytocin. Now, we don't have a lot of control over this flooding of our body with oxytocin. It makes us family bonded, you know? We want eye-to-eye contact. We want intimacy, in case you didn't know it. We like that. We don't want to look out that way. We want to look this way, right? And guess what? We have 1/3 less oxygen in our bloodstream. So we have a little bit harder time rising for hard labor. And we live longer by 3 or 4 years, which is why you see the mother in the family holding the family unit together years and years and years. Okay? This is why humans have been able to flourish, because these 2 complementary types of rational human beings, the masculine rational human being and the feminine rational human being, balance each other and make for a healthy society. Okay? And so we say these differences are not bad. They're good. Okay? And actually the woman, because she's so family bonded, she can be hostile towards outsiders. Okay? That's why women tend to, if you ever hear the word click, tend to click. Okay? We tend to, kind of question the new outsider. Okay? Whereas you guys, come on in, you know? We're like, not so sure. Okay? But you see how that protects the family, right? Okay, so it's just kind of an interesting way the brain works. I can be talking to my friend Diana about this talk, and we'll be in the next room and we'll be saying, you know, what you're going to wear tomorrow, and what's the next quote, and what we're going to eat for lunch, and we're talking about all these things at once, and the guy in the next room has no idea how we got from here to there. But we know how we got there, you know? And it makes sense to us, okay? And however that works, it balances on both sides, okay? Strengths and weaknesses that cause humanity to flourish. As Christians, we would say in Genesis 1, where God said he made mankind in his image, male and female, he's talking about the rational souls of males and females that he gave male and female bodies to, because it takes both to multiply, to fill the earth, to steward it, to subdue it. Not just the sexual part, but in every area it takes both to take care of this unique situation we have here on earth. It takes both sexes. Okay? So, we did the neurology. Let's go on. That bad word, patriarchy. Ooh, that is some bad talk right there. Okay, but really, patriarchy, we're not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Okay, let's talk a little bit about what the definition of patriarchy is. Patriarchy is the rule of fathers, not the rule of men. You hear me? The rule of fathers. Okay? The rule of fathers. The organization of society, the fundamental social unit is the family headed by its father and the reckoning of familial descent in the male line. Now, let's think about patriarchs in the Old Testament. We're going to talk about it. But, just to be clear, we're talking about fatherhood and not male rule. Fatherhood, okay? Now, Philip Longman, Carnegie Institute, not a Christian, that particular foundation, okay? He is quite liberal in his views, but he says, when men take marriage and parenthood with little significance, as many will when those positions are devalued. Remember what we talked about, reaching a solid sense of achievement? Okay, when that is devalued, they will avoid marriage and parenthood. They will avoid it. In such a society, irresponsibility in the task of parenthood is seen as a fundamental threat to society. Okay, where that's devalued, where marriage and parenthood is devalued, it is a threat to society. Okay, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. There's some bad patriarchy, okay? And that's called sociological patriarchy. And that's where men do things for their own advantage and pat themselves on their back because they're stronger than women and they're able to do things they shouldn't do. That's not what we're talking about when we talk about Old Testament patriarchy, okay? When we're talking Old Testament patriarchy, we're talking about a system that made Israel stand out. It was a theocracy, and every other nation around them were barbaric. But Israel was protected by its civil laws within the theocracy. And actually, it was the place where children, orphans, widows, diseased people, and foreign people were protected. Okay? And that was God's provision for a fallen world. Okay? Israel did that. And every man who initiated a family was held accountable for that family unit. Okay? Before God, in Israel, he was held accountable. And there were strict rules for him. Okay? And he had to stand before God for his actions. And we see the good, the bad, and the ugly in our Old Testament. Because guess what? God is a God of reality. He wants us to see what the human is capable of doing because of the sin nature. And that's what we would say to the Atheist Club. Yeah, we admit the Bible tells it like it is, but not everything in the Old Testament is a prescription. Do this. It just reports the narrative, and then it will tell us, and we will be able to read what happens to those who break the laws. Okay? Now, if you have a lot of questions, this is a great book, Is God a Moral Monster? Okay, and we'll talk a little bit more about that one too. But, okay, so that's the Old Testament. But the Old Testament, okay, great as it was, there was no change of the human heart. Okay? But there was something that happened. We read the quote by Solomon, no one was there to help the oppressed, right? But then in Isaiah 61, there was going to be someone who would come to bring in the favorable year of the Lord. And guess who quotes in Luke that quote? And we know who that man is, and he is the only man who lived a perfect life. And who was that? Jesus. Okay, so when Jesus Christ, who came out of that theocracy, right? Israel preserved the lineage of Christ. And when Christ came into the world, he lived out the perfect masculine role. But he didn't call himself a patriarch. Okay? We learn who he is in Ephesians chapter 5. Paul tells us what he did for humanity. And we're going to talk about that in a second. But we do know this, that Jesus, because he was the Son of God, he was able to change the world and change the human heart forever. And his example was kephale, head. Okay? The word kephale in Greek means head. And it's much fuller word than the word patriarch. Okay? It's not just a governing function. It's the person who initiates the family and therefore is held accountable, has to lay down his life to lift up the unit, and whatever is in the benefit of the unit, he puts himself under to raise it up, and he has the authority in that to proceed. Think about Christ. He initiated the church. He was the origin of the church. He was the bridegroom, the source, right? And that's what he says the man who marries is to be. He is to be the one who lays down his life. Now, this is the way Jesus said it. Jesus said, from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female and said, for this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother. Well, he has to be prepared to do something if he's going to leave his father and mother, right? He has to be able to take care of himself, right? Okay, he's going to leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. What God therefore has joined together, let no man separate. But because of the hardness of your heart, he allowed divorce. Here again, Jesus is saying the hardness of the human heart is the oppressive problem, right? The hardness of the human heart. Okay. So, Jesus is saying these two people, this man goes out, he leaves his home, he's able to leave his home, he's able to join with his wife, and they become flesh, and one flesh, and this is before any children, okay? They're a unit, it's unitive, right? It's the only system in our bodies that are not complete on their own is our reproductive system, but it's also a sexual unitive system, okay? It consummates marriage. Okay, so in that way, they became one flesh. They operate now as one unit. And the more they operate as one unit, the more those around them, their family, flourish. The less they operate as one union, then the less their family flourishes. And that's why what you see in our culture is taking place. Children born to single families have an 80% higher chance, those children, of being in prison, being sexually or physically abused, being abandoned, or living in poverty. Okay? Think about it. The male, not the government, the man who comes in and fathers a child is held accountable for that. And Jesus says, you're accountable for that. Okay? Now, just to be a little more specific, a child cannot be conceived unless the male initiates it. You understand what I'm saying? Your DNA is on that child for the rest of his life. Whether you walk away from it and deny it, your DNA goes on to the next generation. And how that child is brought up is going to have something to do with how you take care of that unit, that responsibility. And that is what Jesus is saying, watch me. I'm going to show you how to lay down your life. I'm going to show you how to do what's right. Not only did he do it for us spiritually, he did it for us, which is the most important part, where we can be born again by knowing him and changing our human heart. But that means if my husband wants to go out and buy a new motorcycle, but his child needs to go to summer camp, or maybe he needs a tutor, then he says, that goes to the bottom rung. And now, the ones that I'm responsible before God for, I have to take care of them. I am not saying that Duke is responsible for my spiritual walk. I am responsible to God individually as a woman. He is responsible to God individually as a man. But guess who's responsible for the unit he initiated? He is. So if his son is over here doing this, think about your head body, okay? He's called the head. I'm called the body. Right? And we kind of understand that now that we see all the corpus callosum, and we're more sensory, our body's sort of more integrated with our emotions. But he's over here, and he's got a son who's doing this, rebelling. And the head is supposed to be responsible for that rebellious son, held accountable before God for him. Now you see why fatherless homes are in such trouble, because the church actually says he can't serve in an office if that's going on. If his son's rebelling, he's accountable. He can't serve as an elder or a deacon in his church because he's allowed that to happen. Okay? So you see Christianity is on the side of the woman. And Jesus Christ lifted a lot of oppression that was in the culture off of women because he stood in the gap. Okay? So we see that and we want to say, okay, our answer then is that Jesus Christ lived out the life that none of us can live. But he did say, this is a way. You have a change of heart. We change the human heart by belief in God. You're filled with his Spirit. You're able to walk a new life. But what we do disagree with are several types of feminism. Okay? We agree with one type, we disagree with the other ones. Okay, the type of feminism we disagree with is gender feminism. And I would say the first one that characterizes male traits as inferior, and that's more radical feminism. You know, we don't need those old men. You know, we women, we can have babies and we can work and we can take care of ourselves. We don't need you men. Okay, that's a form of feminism. And guess what? That's sociological matriarchy. Okay, that's the opposite. It really is. Okay, and then the other one says we're just victims. We need special treatment. I say no, we don't need special treatment. We can be the equal. We can be the equal complement. And the other kind, which I firmly disagree with because it doesn't match reality. Okay, and that would be that, you know, the only difference between us is our anatomy. And if women just could get away with not having babies, we'd all be 100% the same. And that I disagree with. And we could get into a big discussion on that. We don't have time for that. Maybe Q&A later. Okay, so what Christianity agrees with is equity feminism. And equity feminism says that it holds to a complementary view of male and female. We need each other. We don't have, and I'm not talking about everybody has to get married. I'm not talking about it. We need each other to steward what we're responsible for in the home, in the church, in the community, in the world, in the workforce. We need the balance of each other, okay? And that we advocate for equal worth and value and dignity for both genders. When one gender is discredited, it hurts everybody. Either side, whether it's radical feminism or sociological patriarchy. It is wrong, it is sinful, it is oppressive. But guess what? Humanity is that way because of our nature. Okay? So, just to conclude, I want to say, again, God's final answer, we would say, does Christianity oppress women? No. Christianity does not oppress women. It releases women. It releases men. It releases the human being from his lost position, his inability to truly understand what it means to be human and to care for the steward, the planet that God gave us. And so God's final answer to the failure of the patriarchs is his answer in Jesus Christ, the man who succeeded when all else failed. Okay? The second Adam, the one that succeeded. Because we see failure after Genesis chapter 2 and chapter 3. And this Adam was the one who did it right. Okay? So that would have been our answer. We would have had a long debate, a long panel discussion. You got to hear my side of it. Okay? So hopefully you've thought of some questions and we can ask those if you would like.